Welcome to Multifamily Talks, a Real Page podcast. Today's guest is a very special guest indeed. We have Erin Roberts, Insights Manager with Ryan Companies. Her and I talk a little bit about a lot of things, a little bit about music, a little bit about market trends, how developers are looking at the market landscape today, and last but not least, how market research matters to different personas and some of the challenges and opportunities that market researchers can offer for all sorts of folks out in the apartment industry. So we hope you enjoy, and we'll check in later. So, Erin, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself here in just a second, but I actually did want to start with a question that I think is fun, icebreaker question. You and I traded some emails a couple of weeks ago now, maybe even a little bit longer, and I just had to come back to it. But you mentioned your time in college as a radio DJ during your undergrad. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience? And I've got some follow-up questions, but I just want to hear about the experience first.
Sure. So back in the day, before radio was fully automated, you kind of needed people there to work all the machines and choose all the music. I lived in a college town, and in the summertime, they had asked if people in high school were interested in learning about being a radio DJ. So my friend and I did it. We were in between our junior and senior years of high school. And so we did it for the summer. So much fun. They forgot to ask us if we were in college when the next semester started. So we basically did a college radio show from senior year of high school to senior year of college. And it was a 2-hour show once a week. It was tons of fun. We learned a lot about music, how to use all the equipment. I would say public speaking skills, but I don't know if that really helped at all. And we both had very different musical tastes. Like, she was definitely like the Chicks and Dave Matthews Band, and I was like Wilco and Deftones, and we were all over the place. So it had no theme whatsoever.
Oh my gosh, I love that though. I mean, but that's kind of that's the beauty of college radio, is that it's so, it's so hodgepodgey, and like you do get personality with it too. And I think, sometimes just radio in general can get a little bit watered down by just trying to play the hits, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I like that, you're able to add your own little flavor into it. So from that experience, and again, I'll let you introduce yourself here in a second, but I had to start with this. Is there anything from that experience that's translated to your current role?
Definitely time management, maybe. So we had to fit everything in 2 hours. You had to make sure that you were transitioning at a certain point. And then I think, as much as I say speaking skills, because I don't, everyone listens to themselves talk, and it always sounds terrible. And I really, really hope that none of those recordings exist, because I'm sure a really annoying high school, early college student. But being able to interact with people, I think, was one thing that I learned. And then I was thinking about this and trying to think of something that was like not the first thing, not the point of view that a lot of other people would think, but like keeping up with trends. And so making sure, and I admittedly not that good at it right now, music wise, but especially commercial real estate, and always making sure you're reading and understanding what's going on. I feel like that kind of fostered it, because I really felt like I needed to know what I was doing. And I think that really helped. Yeah,
just staying abreast of trends and just kind of knowing what's out there, and just having that input from multiple directions, and, being able to then translate that back to folks, which I think you and I probably do a lot in our current role. We take the knowledge and then we try to re-disseminate it somehow.
Yep. Kind of distilling it down, making sure people understand it. So that definitely helped, I think.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, all right. So everybody listening is probably like, "Hey, who are we talking to? You haven't done an intro yet." I just, like I said, I had to put the cart in front of the horse there. That was just probably one of the most interesting intros I've heard from a podcast guest here. So we have Erin Roberts. I'm sorry, with Ryan Companies with us, and Erin, I figured I'd just give you a chance for the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the company, and your role at Ryan Companies there.
Sure. So a little bit about Ryan Companies. We are a design build family owned business. It's based out of Minneapolis. I am here in Austin. We have 17 offices kind of scattered across the United States. We have a Chicago, Minneapolis, Tampa, Atlanta, Denver, San Diego, Seattle, all the fun spots. We generally focus on 5 specific sectors. We have multifamily, which is a relatively new sector for us. We have senior living, we have retail, we have healthcare, and then we do design build to suit as well for a lot of people. And my role, kind of interesting. I was hired about 3 years ago to work specifically with the senior living sector. My background had originally been multifamily, so I spent the first year at Ryan Companies learning a lot about senior living. And it was a new role. And so they had recognized the importance of data, and the importance of how people look at markets, specifically prior to myself. Every region was kind of responsible for verifying their own sites, and every developer did it differently. It was all over the board. Nobody nobody said, "Hey, these are like the 5 KPIs you need to look at. This is what we need to then take it to the board and okay it." So I was brought in to kind of standardize that approach. And so now we are able to look at specific sites, within a couple days and pull all the data together to be able to tell the developers the story about the area, pulling demographics, pulling market data. And so about 2 years ago, when multifamily started as a new sector, I did the same thing with multifamily. And now I'm doing it with healthcare and industrial. So
Oh, interesting.
it's kind of blown up in the past couple of years. And we do a lot of other small things too. We do work a lot with a lot of third-party vendors, and look at their data. And, I'm always pulling in real page data, of course, and disseminating kind of the trends, kind of on a larger national level, on a regional level, and then on a market and site specific level.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually didn't realize that you had been brought in to kind of help standardize it up front, and I think that presents a unique opportunity, also with some challenges, but kind of those fun puzzles that we get to solve. And one of the reasons why we're probably in a researchy role is because we do like trying to piece together these puzzles as we move forward. So that, yeah, I guess I didn't realize that you were brought in to help standardize that. What are some KPIs that y'all generally look at when looking at the development side, in particular for multifamily?
For multifamily, demographics wise, we're looking at population growth, of course, is super important, but drilling down a little bit more and looking at population growth within specific income brackets and specific age brackets. Because we all know, if you look at population overall, sometimes you have that, is it like the 45 to 55-year-olds population is naturally shrinking. So if you have a large population of 45 to 55-year-olds, you're going to get negative population. Well, let's turn that around and look at population growth for our, prime apartment renter age, and look at 25 to 35-year-olds, 25 to 40-year-olds. And so really looking at that, and looking at, the share of renters over time, how is that changing? Look at income levels, how is that changing as well? And we have this sheet that we send out to the developers with all of this information on it, and we're kind of measuring that against national benchmark. just to see, or is this trend higher? Yes. The population growth isn't that great, but it's actually better than the national average. And what comprises that?
Yeah, I think oftentimes you do need some sort of benchmark to at least contextualize, because a number is a number, but in a vacuum, it doesn't really mean anything. So just even having some, like you said, benchmark to compare to, it makes sense. And y'all are active nationally too, of course, correct? So you mentioned all the offices. So I think having that benchmark, whether intra regionally or national, just some sort of context. Is always important, and truthfully, even in our role too, because I think when you start, you touched on this, where you have an overall population number. Let's say it's population growth. If you compare that to something that's a little bit more nuanced, like renter age population, the story can be very different, and that's where our role. It's fun because you get to dive into that, but then you have to retranslate that back to someone who maybe either got fixated on that headline number or maybe isn't familiar with, oh, this is the way you split this data out. I see why you're doing that now. It's people that don't live in the data as much as we do.
Right. And this kind of goes back to that question we were talking about before we started recording, but on a market data level, kind of pulling down from, everyone sees the national headlines, or like if you're looking at a specific area, Denver, for instance, the population growth is shrinking and, there's all this construction going on. But what happens when you look at a micro market level and you're looking at, one specific zip code, two specific zip codes, really drilling down to the neighborhood level? What does that data tell you, and how is that different than what everyone else thinks that they're seeing? But yeah, we've really emphasized the micro market level. And one thing that we've been looking at, and I've noticed that you guys have added this, so that's awesome, is lease up rates.
Oh, lease up rates. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's always been, like, throughout my career, that's always been something that we look at, because you could have, occupancy could be going down because there's a lot of stuff in lease up, and yes, it's going to take a while to lease up. Just because the occupancy rate is going down doesn't mean they're not leasing. You can't physically lease 100 apartment units a month. That's not something that anyone can do. Right. But so looking at the lease up rate and making sure that remains strong, especially in areas where there are multiple properties under construction. Yeah. And then looking at lease up rates over time. And looking back and saying, hey, the last cohort of properties that were in lease up, this was their lease up rate until they stabilized. What is it now? Is it starting to go down, or are we starting to see a softening in the market? Is it still staying steady? Is it increasing? So what is that telling us about demand in the market?
Yeah, it's almost like you have these same storeness in a way, where you want to compare like properties, but properties that are, it's one thing to say Class A units, and that's still useful. But if you have those properties that work through lease up, kind of as a cohort, almost, I guess would probably be the a way to look at it. And compare that, then I think it gives you some idea. And I actually love the point you touch on there too, where, again, oftentimes we're asked about some headline number. How many units did that property lease up this month? Well, that can be useful, but this is where context is important, where if historically you were targeting, and I'm just totally making up numbers here, historically you're targeting 15 units leased up per month per property. If you're getting 12 units per property today, maybe that's not exactly where you want to be, but considering that there's 8 additional properties in a 2-mile radius, you're like, yeah, we actually feel pretty good about that. We knew that the market was going to be a little bit more saturated, so we adjusted expectations, but that's where you have to have, exactly like you're saying, you have to have some sort of comparison point to go against.
Right. And then kind of taking that into the future and saying, hey, if there's, these 8 properties in lease up all in the same area, they're leasing at 12 units a month. In 2 years, there's going to be no supply. And, then we're going to start leasing, or 3 years, then what do we think we're going to be leasing up? It's not going to be 12 units a month. So, kind of telling that story into the future.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something I'm actually kind of curious as we're talking about this is looking at market differences in terms of lease up velocity. Do certain markets behave differently when it comes to lease ups? And I'll something I've seen in the data is that the Houston market tends to lean more on concessions among stabilized assets than some other areas of the country. So I'm wondering if there's almost like these market level quirks in terms of the lease up space too, that you do notice some differences between. Is that more fact or fiction? I'm just kind of curious.
I mean, we've definitely, when it comes to lease up rates, I've noticed that, it can be very regional. Like you have Sun Belt markets that, 20 units a month is normal. And then you go up to like the Midwest or the North where 15 units a month is more normal. And that's healthy. That's not a bad number. It's just, it's different. You have the population growth velocity is a little bit different. And people, I think in the North are a little bit pickier about where they want to be. As opposed to some of the Sunbelt markets are like wherever you can find space, go, or like wherever is offering concessions, go. But like Chicago, for instance, it depends on where it's located on the rail line, or it really has a lot to do with the transportation.
Yeah, that's where it's fun to start to dive into the individual markets. And that's something that I think you and I, even though our roles are similar, this is where it probably differs to a large degree, is that oftentimes in our perspective, we're looking at market, maybe sub-market, but we're generally talking 30,000 foot trends. You in particular are being asked to quantify the viability or the components of a neighborhood, literally street corners. I heard somebody tell me somebody mentioned this one time, and I love the way it was framed, was that you don't build a market, but you do build a street corner, and the market affects the street corner, but at the street corners where it ultimately matters when you're talking about property level performance.
Right. We don't relate this to any of our sites or anything, but what I like to look at is like, what direction do you have to turn to get in and out of a property? And like, do you have to take a left or a right to get to like where you work? And so, if there's a whole bunch of apartments all in the same area, you're going to pick the one that's like easier to get out of, that you don't have to deal with traffic as much. So I don't know why, but I always think about that when I drive by apartments.
Yeah, but I actually love that you mentioned that, because that's exactly the kind of thing that matters, is that if all else being equal, if a renter had two properties that were same rent, same location, same neighborhood, same amenities, same square foot, everything's the same, but it comes down to something like how easy is it to get in and out of, that can actually make a big impact. And whenever the environment is as competitive as it is today, those can be the big differentiators, or at least I think so. Now, granted, I'm not on the applied side as much as you are, but I think that those are the things that can really matter, and why things like site visits really matter, and being able to really look and feel and touch the asset from a neighborhood level.
Yeah, and we do try and do site visits and go visit specific locations, and we do interact a lot with all of our local developers, and kind of go back and forth, and we kind of say when we do our initial site analysis, that's like the start of the conversation, and so that's the initial, hey, here's the data, this is the story it's telling me. Are you seeing anything else? And, if we have, I pulled these comps, this is what I think works. What are you looking at? And, kind of going through the pipeline, it's a little bit easier now, because all the stuff that's like pre-planned, we're assuming, is really kind of holding off for now, but kind of combing through that, because they know all the other local developers, they know the local brokers, they understand what's going on in the market. And as much as I love to be the market expert, like I'm not there. Yeah. And so being able to work with them and understand what's going on a kind of smaller market level, that really helps us as well.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think I've noticed too, is that I'll go speak to someone, and, pretty quickly I'm like, how can I know more about Orange County than somebody that's operating in Orange County? I think sometimes the value, though, is being able to present it from an outside, almost market agnostic perspective of, I'm not living and breathing the market the same way you are, but here's what we're seeing in some of the data. And I think that's where that marriage can be kind of nice between our role and those folks that, like you said, you would defer the very hyper local knowledge on, and you're not trying to replace that expertise.
No, yeah, I mean, we're kind of just trying to complement it, and merge kind of the quantitative and the qualitative together, and making the story and making sure it's understood by both parties, so that if we want to move forward or not, we know the full story.
Yeah. So it sounds like population is a big KPI. Lease up rates.
Oh, sorry, that kind of got off track.
No, this is what we want to do with the podcast. We want to be able to dive into these conversations. I'm glad it did. So we population growth, lease up rates, absorption, something around that. Any other KPIs that stand out as like the holy trinity of what your day to day looks like?
Rent growth,
of
course. We gotta make sure those performers are working, and kind of diving into rent growth. And we have started double checking in some of our markets to see where the rent growth is coming from, or where the negative rent growth, I guess I should rephrase that, where the negative rent growth is happening. And is that happening in, class A minus, class B properties that now, there's all this new class A being built and in lease up, and they're offering concessions, and it's actually not that much more expensive for somebody to move one of those properties to new class A property. And I know you guys kind of talked about that, I think, on your last webcast. So I was excited you guys talking about that, because we were seeing that in the market a little bit as well. Or is it just the class A properties competing against one another, and the rest of the market is pretty well stabilized and not affected by that at all? So kind of understanding that dynamic.
Yeah, that's been one of the big things. And for some viewers that maybe haven't seen exactly what we're talking about there, we've recently been looking at data that shows the difference between a lease up rent and, say, something that was built in the 1990s or a class B, more stabilized existing stock. And to Erin's point, a lot of the stock that's moving through lease up today is much more similar product price, has a much more similar price point than the stabilized product in a lot of these markets than I think some people initially assumed. So that's where breaking apart, not just looking at a market's rent growth, but saying, what is that A rent growth? What does that A minus rent growth look like? What does a lease up's rent growth look like? And being able to compare those to see, and I think you framed it perfectly there, where is that rent growth coming from or not coming from, in this case, where are rents declining the fastest? And then you can start to get in and compare a level deeper to say, is it some economic thing happening in that market or that product class? Is it some sort of supply component where, just as you said, 10 lease ups in a market, but they're all competing amongst themselves and all the other A's, and I'm sure that is the case sometimes, but sometimes it's probably not. So being able to really dig in and figure out more of why that is so key.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be really important going into 2024, because there's going to be so many markets with oversupply, and we're going to have to be really creative as to how we look at them and understand what's going on in 2024 as a short-term effect. And so, it's not going to be, we're not going to forecast it out the same. Like, what are we going to assume is going to happen in 2026, the end of 2025, once it's all leased up?
Yeah, so that's probably a good transition point for a question too here then. So looking at the difference between 24 and say 26 plus at this point, or 2024 and 2026 plus, I should say, what are some things that are on your radar for 2024? And then I'll get to 2020, call it post 2025 here in a second.
Well, I have, I kind of just had a huge list of trends in the next couple years. But some things that we're starting to see now, and I know that they've been touched on by a lot of people, is shifting migration trends. So both Texas and Florida are becoming a lot more expensive. Yes, they're still getting like huge population gains. And, a lot of that, I know Texas, you were both in Texas. So you get a lot of people coming from California where our expensive is not their expensive. And so they're okay with that. But what's going to happen in Florida, especially with insurance prices, as that becomes unwieldy for a lot of the people that are moving there. And so just thinking about where the population is going to shift. And we know like the Carolinas, Southeast is definitely seeing a bump. I know Idaho is still very popular, but it has a much smaller population base.
Yeah. That's kind of an interesting one because you do see Idaho and Montana are appealing in some ways, but it's just, the denominator there is so tiny in the grand scheme of things. So I'll offer something there too that I think is what we've been coming to the market with some of our commentary lately specific to Texas is that one of our, not necessarily assumptions, but this could be something to watch for between Austin, where you're located, and San Antonio, is that historically, Austin has been, the preferred destination for a lot of Texas-bound migration. But as Austin becomes more expensive, does San Antonio actually start to capture more of the Texas-bound migration that would have historically head to Austin and is now looking for a more affordable area? So, and I'll throw out a number here where the difference between a Class A unit in Austin and in San Antonio is something like $450 different per month. A huge difference. And I think that does affect where people start to consider moving. And, 2 cycles ago, call it the late 90s, early 2000s, Miami and South Florida was a big destination spot. Well, as that part of the state became more expensive, Central Florida, Tampa and Orlando became a more preferred, maybe not more preferred, but more common destination spot. But as those markets are starting to get more expensive, does that open the door for, say, a Jacksonville? And maybe that's not enough to be the one thing that underlines an investment thesis. But this is where the market research component is so important, to be able to at least pepper that in there and say, hey, here's a consideration.
Yeah. So you are starting to kind of see that. I mean, I know the talking about the I-35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio. Oh my gosh. Like 5 years ago, you would drive down and there'd be like little pockets of empty space, and you do it now and it's just, there's like no empty space left.
It really doesn't feel like it changes. You can tell it changes in terms of, character. Austin's very different than San Antonio, of course. But like you said, in terms of being continuous or continuity, it's starting to feel just like one metro area the way DFW does. DFW, you can't really tell when you leave Dallas and get into Fort Worth, because it blends together. I think San Antonio and Austin are going to continue to do that, and you're seeing it boots on the ground there.
Right. So that kind of leads into one of my next thoughts, and I know this has been over talked about so much, but work from home and how is that starting to impact? You have all these larger companies trying to spearhead, hey, we need to be back in the office, and getting pushback. And it's just kind of this push-pull right now, where nobody's quite decided as to what's happening. And so I feel like maybe in that case, like San Antonio, it's close enough that you can get to Austin if you need to, but you don't necessarily have to be there. So what is it going to do to these kind of secondary markets that are closer into the larger metros, where as opposed people were like in Boise or out in like Florida, where it was nowhere near the offices they needed to be. So people are going to start kind of moving closer back in.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. The Boise example where, if you were in San Francisco, but you can't really commute from Boise, but now maybe you have to commute or something. But, that's something that it'll be curious to revisit this podcast in say 5 years and say, wow, that was a great prediction, or wow, this is a terrible prediction. But I do think there's something to be said about those, what we often call satellite cities, far enough away from their bigger anchoring metro that they're a unique city. It's not just a suburban area or even exurban, but they're close enough to where a once or a twice a week, maybe close enough to get to an airport if you're traveling a lot for air travel. Right. I think those can make compelling development targets over the long haul. And especially the Austin San Antonio example is perfect, where 20 years ago, had you just followed the trajectory of population, those infill submarkets that were once fields along I-35 are now like, hey, this is actually prime real estate. So, and this is where you have a really interesting view on the market, is that, you're often asked to think 3+ years, 5+ years down the road, like you're seeing around corners and then trying to see around corners. Oftentimes,
right.
Our role is, what do you see in 2024? What's the big thing we should be keeping an eye on? And, this is why I think it's an interesting conversation with you, because it's just different time horizons that we're often comparing.
Right. I know. It's just, we're always trying to figure out what's going to happen. But, who knows?
Yeah, a lot can happen.
It's always a wild guess. I know that you were, I think it was one of your previous podcasts. I have been listening to them. They've been very good. But you said we're like meteorologists.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, yeah, like we can tell you why this is happening now. These are all the factors that led to this. And yeah, we can tell you what we think is going to happen in 3 years. But if like late season hurricane just blows in and messes everything up, then, it's like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's some things you just can't account for. It just totally throws things out of whack. And you can try to the best you can, but, there's just certain things that are unforeseen. The one thing that I do want to touch on too, real quick, before we get into some, just kind of curious to learn a little bit more about your personal background. But one thing I did want to touch on real quick, from the perspective of a developer, what are y'all seeing in the construction delays side of things? And I'll just debrief our audience here, where historically we get questions about, are you seeing are you seeing delays in the construction pipeline? I honestly think over the past year, that question has been honestly 10 times more common than any other point in my career. Are you seeing more challenges on construction delays? Are they becoming more common, or is it just more, well, it makes for a cool narrative, but it's not really happening?
When it comes to stuff under construction, yeah, I mean, it's still happening. I think a lot of what we're seeing now is electrical equipment. And I kind of talked to somebody about this. I don't necessarily follow a property when it's under construction unless it's to go back and kind of check on the market.
Sure.
And double check that like the pro forma still works, and if we're getting an operator, what the rents, kind of double checking what they're telling us. But yeah, I mean, a lot of electrical equipment. We have a project under construction right now that's starting to deliver soon, and we ordered the electrical equipment 3 years ago.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And so we've just been very proactive about ordering everything we need to, and really having good relationships with our suppliers. But I think it's just going to happen until 2024, 2025, as everyone it keeps on delivering what they need to deliver. And then it'll drop off then, because, you're not going to have the inventory you need.
Yeah. And we're seeing already in the data where, and I'll get the exact number wrong, so don't quote me on this, but starts on a year-to-date basis, new apartment starts, that is, are down something like 40% nationally versus the same time of year in 2022. So do you think that, because this is another question we get sometimes, and I'm curious to get your perspective, do you think that 2025 is the point where you start to see the pipeline begin to shrink considerably, or do you think it's more of a 2026 thing?
I think it depends on the capital markets.
on the market, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on when equity decides to kind of come back into play, and I would hope that it would be kind of 2025-ish. Otherwise, we're going to have a pretty big gap of inventory, which could be good, of course, for us that are developing. But I would say like the end of 2025 or 2024, sorry, beginning of 2025. There is and I'm not an economist, but I'm kind of an economics nerd.
Yeah, yeah.
There is, the job report that just came out looked good for the Fed wise. So we'll kind of see what happens in the next year.
Yeah, I kind of had the same takeaway where the capital markets is ultimately what matters here, and this is kind of an important pivot point in some ways where you always have to be planning for the future. A lot of that future planning is kind of guessing where we think the economy is going to be, and there's a lot of mixed signals out there right now that the Fed's also having to sort through. But I tend to agree with your takeaway there that 24 is ultimately the peak of supply. 25, it's starting to come down, but a lot of the units that are working through construction right now aren't going to deliver next year. They're going to deliver the following year in 2025. Right. And then I think we start to see, a tangible pullback in realized deliveries.
Right. And the issue sometimes with equity is it doesn't look ahead as much as we do.
Yeah.
And so if you're in 2025, you have all those units still in lease up and the market doesn't look too great, they're not going to want to do anything with it. Even though we know that, hey, like we're looking at 2025, but we're actually going to deliver in 2027. And by that time it would look great. So yeah, I mean, we definitely have different views on how to look at the market when it comes to, us versus equity and finance.
Yeah, that lag there is a key component. Just again, it comes down to different horizons for different personas. But that lag, you don't permit something. You don't have to come up with the idea of a property tomorrow, have it permitted by the end of the year, and start January 1. We're recording this in mid-November. That lag between all that is significant, and I think that's going to be something that further informs more of that pipeline outlook. Is what does that lag look like, and do you see continued hiccups that have been, kind of a result of the pandemic? Does that continue forward? Does that start to normalize? Where does that ultimately end?
Yeah, and I'm excited to see what the fourth quarter data shows.
So I did want to get a little bit more specific to your current role, looking at market research. Again, the podcast that we've been presenting here, we've been trying to bring on different voices from the market research arena. So let me ask you, from your perspective, what do you think is the value of a market researcher or an economist on, I guess, what is the value of market research within the broader scope of what it is that y'all do?
I really think it's being able to bring the qualitative and the quantitative together. And being able to tell those stories in a way that people understand and is really easy to digest. And granted, I know this is the issue I have sometimes with it, where like I want to tell people like the 10 million things that are happening and they just want to hear like the 3 things. So being able to do that in a manner that still says everything that you need to say. Yes, but just in a very concise way. And I think what we do is super important for future planning. Because we're out there trying to predict the market, trying to figure out, where people are going to be in the next 5 years. Where's the need for housing? What type of housing? And so kind of being able to answer those questions.
Yeah, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way with development where, generally speaking, people can only move to places where housing is made available to move into. So if you're not actually building housing, that does curb some level of growth in markets, because you can only move to where is available to currently move to.
Right. Absorption follows supply.
Yeah, and we have a lot of data points that show this clearly, that absorption does follow supply. And sure, there can be periods where absorption maybe trails supply a little bit more substantially, or vice versa, absorption outpaces supply. But these are just normal economic cycles, and this is what you'll see over any sort of horizon, 5, 10, 20, 50 years. You look at any economic data point, and those supply demand curves will often go through ebbs and flows.
Right. So can I ask you what your view on that question is? Because I know you talk to so many people that are kind of on the market research end So I'm wondering if you have something different.
Yeah,
Throwing a
no,
question at you. I'm sorry.
no, I actually love that you turned the table. This is so funny because I feel like I never want to barrage our guests with questions. So I actually like that you turned the tables here. I would actually agree. I think our previous guest, Jesse McConico with John Burns Real Estate, she and I talked a little bit about this, but to me, that market research does a few things. One, it provides perspective that others don't necessarily have the time to dive into themselves. Oftentimes we read a newspaper article on, or maybe not newspaper, that something online, we'll read something online about an industry or a trend that we're interested in, but we don't have the time to keep up with. Us as market researchers can be that source of knowledge to give you the little nuggets of wisdom. And I think you said, a challenge we have is that we find a million trends we want to talk about, and we have to share 5 of those. I've always liked the saying of, oftentimes we'll get asked what time it is. Well, sometimes we default to telling how the watch was made because we find it so interesting when somebody's just like, I need to know what time it is.
Yeah. No, I definitely have that problem.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, because I do think that that's one of those traits that in a market researcher you almost kind of want to have, because there's this innate curiosity where you like digging into these things, and it doesn't even have to be real estate. It could be any sort of thing that you enjoy researching. And I may ask you actually here in a second about some research not related to real estate. But before we get there, the other thing I think that market researchers bring to the table is an outside perspective, kind of like we were talking about earlier, where you're being asked to keep up with 50 plus markets nationally. Somebody that is in Seattle is always going to know more about Seattle than you will. Or somebody that's in Miami is always going to know more about Miami than I could even ever pretend to know. But we can say, here's what we're seeing from a removed perspective on that market, and here's how it compares to some other markets where, being able to draw those comparison points is valuable within itself. So I guess that would be my answer.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important, and always having that benchmark so people understand the broader picture.
Yeah, you kind of give me an idea here now where maybe I should get guests that come on over the next few times. We should create a word cloud with that question and seeing what the most important words that come up are. I'd be kind of curious. And again, this is why we're researchers, is we have these little curiosities that come up along the way. So
I think that's a great idea.
Well, thank you. So I did want to, and I don't want to keep you too much longer because you've already been so generous with your time, but I did want to talk a little bit about research outside of real estate. Your background, education, you and I talked a little bit about it offline, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got into the market research role that you're currently at. What did that education background look like? How did you find yourself into this current position?
Sure. So yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and we have such an interesting parallel when it comes to our education journey. So I got my undergrad in elementary education. Totally different than what I do now. I realized that I didn't like kids in large groups. I have a child, so yes, I love children, but just kind of there was so much more of like a having to keep small kids organized,
right.
More of a parenting aspect than it was like a teaching aspect. And I kind of knew I didn't want to do that when I was finishing up, and it was kind of like, I'm almost there, I got to do it. And then went back to school for my master's, and I did geography. Yay, geography. And GIS, which, there's so many different applications for geography. You can kind of pick what you want to do past then. And so I had always been really interested in urban geography, urban planning. I moved to Austin, did like kind of the millennial, I'm going to move without a job thing and figure it out from there. And ended up working at a third-party market research firm that just basically did Central Texas. So we were working a lot in Austin and San Antonio, and the I-35 corridor. And I originally had started doing just kind of their GIS stuff. And the president there was an amazing mentor. He saw how much I really liked, the commercial real estate industry, and I worked there for 8 years, moved my way up to senior associate, and kind of just learned on the job. And so we mainly worked with developers and jurisdictions. So a lot of multifamily feasibility, economic impact analysis, mixed use development, kind of the whole gamut. And I guess it was during COVID, and everyone kind of had that like, am I really doing what I love to do? What else do I want to do with life kind of moment? And I had always been really interested in either working for a developer or an operator and just kind of seeing that different side. And so somebody that I knew had sent me, a professional connection had sent me the job listing for this job. And then it just kind of took off from there. And I feel like every couple months, my job, it was a new job. So I kind of got to make it up. And so it was like, okay, well, what do we want to do? And I feel like every couple months it changes. So it's very, like, I'm never bored.
Yeah, always challenged, and I like the challenged in a good way for, like the curiosity challenges and trying to piece it all together. And I like how you basically tied it together with what we said at the very beginning of the podcast, which was, you kind of got to build this yourself, but that comes with some difficulties too, where you're kind of doing it from scratch. And, it's kind of like,
right.
I'm sure the best cake you can ever make is from total scratch, but that takes a lot of steps and a lot of work, but it's rewarding in the long run because it is truly unique and it brings, the most unique perspective to the table.
Right. And I honestly, I know we met at the NMHC research forum. And so meeting people there and being able to understand how they do what they do. And I feel like a lot of people that are in these roles are more either with operators or asset management. And so there is kind of a smaller pool of us that work for developers. And so anytime I meet somebody that does real estate research, I'm always very, very excited and have a bunch of questions for them. So of course, that's where the curiosity comes in. So being able to make those connections, professional connections, and learn from them as I go.
Yeah,
that's a lot of fun.
I find it interesting too that the developer side of the equation doesn't necessarily have, well, I shouldn't say the developer side doesn't have it's not as common to find market research, just like you mentioned. But to me, especially with geography, which is for our viewers, just like Erin said, crazy similar backgrounds. I studied secondary education and then got a master's in geography that was more of an economic geography focus. And something like site selection for developers, arguably the most important thing. Who better to ask than people that study the land and human interaction and how people interact with the space around them, and what does space mean, this physical container versus place, this feeling of an area, those things, who better to ask than a geographer. So I'm totally on the let's get a consortium of geographers who can help developers understand these markets and these locales, it's so funny how similar our backgrounds are and how similar our current roles are in many ways.
I think we need ask a geographer buttons.
Ask a geographer. I like that.
I was very excited to find out that that you did geography as well, because I feel it's a very different way of looking at things. And I feel like our brains are more attuned to bring in lots of little pieces and figure out how they interact.
Yep. Yeah, because you have to look at things from, pardon the pun, but a 360 perspective where it really is the global discipline. It's just, you have to look at things from so many different arenas, and admittedly something that's harder to tangibly measure than, chemistry, where a quote unquote hard science, you can say 2 parts of this and 1 part of this always equals X outcome. That doesn't necessarily happen in the soft sciences, i.e. geography or economics. So it's kind of cool. Well, I guess anything else that you wanted to share with our audience before we let you go? And thank you for being so generous with your time.
Yeah, no, this was great. I was honored when you asked me to do this. You have had a lot of really insightful guests, so I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much. And for anybody who's interested, reaching out to Erin, we'll make some information available after the podcast here. But Erin, thanks as always, and looking forward to meeting up with you again soon in the future.
Oh my gosh, am I not getting the music question?
Oh, the music question. Okay. Oh man. Okay, good. I'm so sorry. I have my email pulled up here, but it was chopped off the list. All right. So wrap up question, and I'm so glad you asked this. Thank you. Wrap up question. What are the last 3 artists you've played on Spotify or Apple Music, whichever service you use?
Not Disney related. I'll preface it with that. It is Moody Banks. And she is a local Austin hip hop artist. She's really awesome. And this is where my like nerdy local radio station comes in, because then they play local Austin music, and I love to listen to that. Mitski, and then Better Oblivion Community Center was the last one I listened to, and that's Connor Oberst and Phoebe Bridgers.
Oh.
And they have like a little side project. I just found it. I didn't realize that they had done that, so that's really awesome. And podcasts, all the podcasts.
All the podcasts. That's actually really interesting. I didn't realize that Connor Oberst and Phoebe Bridgers had a project together, because both individually they're excellent. So together, I wonder what that would be like. You've given me a little bit of homework now. I have to go check it. What was the band name again?
Better Oblivion. Oh, hang on. I have to look it up. Better Oblivion Community Project.
Okay. Better Oblivion. Okay, I just had to type that out. All right, so had to type that out. I'm going to listen to that on the way home this afternoon. But
yeah, it was great. Yeah, and I don't know how I missed that, because I love both of them, and I didn't know that they had come out with that at all. So that's my not keeping up on music trends.
That's my not keeping up on music trends. Well, I think you're probably more in tune than 99.9% of people out there. So, well, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for reminding me of that last question too. I actually loved that. And again, we'll make anything available. If you'd like to contact Erin afterwards, then please do so. But thank you for being so generous with your time again.
No problem. Thank you, Carl.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Multifamily Talks, a Real Page podcast. As always, the views expressed are those of the individuals participating and not those of Real Page.